got the idea.
You idiot! They're shooting your leader!
The Disney afternoon show used to be that ritualistic sacred time of the day when the kids would come back from school, grab their snacks and switch on the TV to watch back-to-back cartoon shows like DuckTales, Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers, TaleSpin, Darkwing Duck, Goof Troop and many more. Each of them was pretty cool and different from the others. While they are also very careful from what they're putting forward in front of their young audience, they couldn't just throw in topics like politics, warfare or terrorism just because they sounded interesting. Well, one of these shows would beg to differ. TaleSpin had always been remembered as a beloved kids show for bringing back one of the most iconic Disney characters, Baloo from The Jungle Book, and turning him into a bush pilot, flying cargo ships, but sometimes the subject matter of its episodes would just fly right over the heads of many young viewers. Even the ending of this show, which could have been a warm and final goodbye to these characters through one last big adventure in the sky, ended up becoming too controversial to air. So why did a Disney show end its run with a topic so out of place for their audience? What were the writers even thinking? Well, in today's video, I'm going to take a deep dive into TaleSpin's history from its rise to its ending to know what exactly went wrong. So hang tight till the end and let's get started. How did TaleSpin end? So, before I dive into the details of the ending episode, let me talk about the nature of its ending, which I thought was quite strange for a fan favourite cartoon show to take on. Disney dusted off some very familiar cartoon characters like Baloo, Louie and even Shere Khan from The Jungle Book and set them in the golden age of aviation, in the harbour town of Cape Suzette. But after running for only 65 episodes, the show abruptly ended without even saying a proper goodbye. The last episode was titled Flying Dupes, in which Baloo, the bush pilot of the Sea Duck plane, transported a bomb wrapped in a gift box. Well, you can guess the episode was meant to be one last messy adventure, and it did have that anxious tone throughout, but even in the concluding moment, you got a pretty regular basic ending, which was very disappointing. Now I know that TaleSpin couldn't have had the same impact as The Jungle Book, but it's still considered an iconic kids show that could have run longer. However, taking a quick look at the history of TaleSpin may help us understand why it ended abruptly despite being a well-received show. The rise of TaleSpin. Today's video will take you to that good old time when TaleSpin started its unique journey in the world of animation. So, in the 1990s, Disney saw a boom in the animated shows for television, mostly after their previous work, DuckTales, which already proved that Disney could go beyond the theatre releases and have a hit. So they were looking for another playful TV show to bring back that 1930s adventures and pulp nostalgia through the adventures of a carefree but naive pilot character. The supervising producer, Jim Magan and Mark Zasolv, didn't have much of a deadline or any certain kind of restriction for the show, so they decided to bring back Baloo from The Jungle Book. He was heavily inspired by Tales of the Gold Monkey, and the influence was visible all throughout the TaleSpin show. In The Jungle Book, Baloo was this carefree, childlike bear who sang about bare necessities, but ended up being a true friend of Mowgli, as well as a father figure to him. So they took him from there and turned him into a cargo pilot who's still irresponsible with spending, but he knew everything about planes like the back of his hand. Also, King Louie was no longer the king of the monkeys, as in TaleSpin, he had his own waterfront nightclub. And Shere Khan? He's the world's richest business tycoon and a recurring villain in the story. Written by Alan Burnett, Len Ully and Mark Zasolv, the very episode of what we should call a pilot was almost a 4-part miniseries titled Plunder and Lightning, in which we're first introduced to a reimagined Baloo as the pilot, his close friend Kit Cloudkicker as an orphaned young bear cub who used to work for a dangerous pirate group led by Don Carnage. The episode opens with the pirate group hijacking a transport plane of Khan Industries to steal a mysterious glowing gem. But one of the outlaws from the group, this little Kit Cloudkicker, stole the box already and sky surfed from that place to land at a tavern of Louie, where he came across our rumble and tumble aviator Baloo. He's a bit reckless in his business, so after a long time of neglecting his debts, when he finally returns, a businesswoman named Rebecca Cunningham takes over his falling company, Hire for Hire. She also takes over the plane, Sea Duck, and keeps Baloo as her employee. Now to get rich, Baloo makes another reckless decision to open the mysterious box to get the jewel, which helps the pirates track him down. Now the blame falls on Rebecca and her daughter Molly. Carnage takes them to their pirate island and holds them captive. So Kit finally confesses his past links with the pirate group and helps Baloo track these pirates to their base. After reaching there, Baloo and Kit find out that the stolen item was actually a power source, which is now being used by these pirates to build a lightning gun. They have placed that stone in their massive airship called Iron Vulture. So Kit once again attempts to steal it by sneaking inside the airship. He steals the stone, but it causes the gun to misfire, severely damaging the ship. Now, the defense's pirate group are forced to retreat, while Baloo and Kit manage to bring Rebecca and Molly safely back to Cape Suzette. These 4 episodes back to back gave us our favourite characters in a whole new form, with a modernised narrative where they're fighting against political threat and criminal activities. Furthermore, the perfect cinematic storytelling of this episode earned a nomination at the Primetime Emmy Awards for Outstanding Animated Programme for episodes that ran for more than 1 hour. The emotional core, Baloo and Kit. The truest reason why I would call the ending of TaleSpin a reckless ending is the complete ignorance of Baloo and Kit's relationship in the story. The final episode, Flying Dupes, didn't even have Kit and Baloo doing what they do best, going on adventures together while always looking out for each other, and that's the actual core of the story. But Flying Dupes totally forgot that. The best way I can describe Baloo and Kit's relationship is to explain one of the famous episodes from this series, Stormy Weather, where Kit's dangerous acrobatic stunts impress a criminal in disguise called Daring Dan Dawson, who showered the kid with praises and offered him to join his air circus show. But Baloo found it extremely risky, and just like a caring father, he scolded Kit and asked him not to take that endeavour, which pissed the cub off. And he said something that totally broke Baloo's heart. He told Baloo, "You're not my dad," which was indeed true, but one thing everyone loved about that show is how Kit's arrival in the story changed Baloo's personality and shaped him more like a parental figure for the orphaned cub. Now Kit believed that his true talent was recognised by no one but Dan, but right after he joined his circus, the whole picture became clear to him. Dan was an exploitative boss who used to push him harder to do more dangerous stunts so that he could earn better money. But that led Kit to be trapped in the mid-air, where he realised Baloo's words that he said simply out of fatherly concerns. Now, Baloo, however, came to rescue the kid from the danger, and their relationship once again got back to its usual form. The emotional bond became stronger, and ever since, we couldn't even imagine an episode where these two wouldn't team up together. Thembria, why the finale uses Colonel Spigot. So if you used to watch TaleSpin regularly, you probably have an idea that Thembria was always there in the story. It didn't just pop out of nowhere in the last episode. Thembria was actually an over-exaggerated version of a military state where they worship bureaucracy like a religion. Here you can get a lifetime prison sentence for the most minor mistake, like it can be just having some fun in the snow or forgetting to praise someone's new haircut. I will talk about these 2 most hilarious episodes from this show, where Thembria was featured way before the final episode came in. In an episode called Flight of the Snow Duck, Baloo arrived in Thembria to deliver the flamingos, but the biggest mistake he did was parking his plane slightly too close to a dock, so he immediately had to fill some paperwork as a punishment. Meanwhile, Molly and Wildcat committed an even greater offence, which was playing in the snow and making a snowman, for which they were arrested. This episode eventually turned out to be a prison break adventure. The next one I'm going to talk about featured another most annoyingly cute character called Colonel Ivanov Spigot, who is a short-sized boar with a temper that matches Napoleon. He's the head of the Thembrian Air Force, who always boasts his power and false stories of adventures just to embarrass himself in front of others. Now in the 46th episode, titled Flight School Confidential, Thembria suddenly passed a law of dropping the age limit for aviation students. So our little Kit Cloudkicker joined the institution only to find out that it's actually Spigot who wanted to exploit the kids by secretly using them as props in a military parade to cover up their bureaucratic mess-up. As usual, Kit and Baloo exposed the truth, and Spigot was held responsible for committing such a crime instead of just accepting his wrongdoing. However, the final episode brought Spigot once again just to portray his stubbornness that his fellow Air Force officers and Baloo would tolerate. And I think the point of the last episode was that after messing up so much, he'd still be that annoyingly arrogant guy, and no matter what, he's never gonna change. Cape Suzette and the world of TaleSpin. Well, speaking of Cape Suzette, it was actually the heart of the whole show. The picturesque world building has always been the main intrigue of all kinds of Disney animation, and Cape Suzette was no exception for that. Cape Suzette, the port town where Baloo parked his sea duck, is where these characters became more than just some illustrated goofy animals who can talk. They became part of our childhood, and kind of our friends who many of us had grown up with. And I think the main reason for that nostalgia to kick in was the naturally enriched town of Cape Suzette, surrounded by cliffs and the sea, but at the same time, it was the busiest aviation hub in the universe of TaleSpin. We see cargo planes come and go all the time, and pilots make their living by transporting goods. We got many episodes where the town had been the central focus, sometimes in danger or sometimes acting as the saviour. In one such episode titled Jumping the Guns, we got to know that Cape Suzette was actually a heavily fortified city. Centuries, Don Carnage managed to infiltrate the entrance after hijacking Baloo's plane Sea Duck. However, later Baloo, with the help of an old and inexperienced guard called Barney, eventually hit the Iron Vulture to drive them away from their city. The penultimate episode, Bygones. Alright, in my personal opinion, the penultimate episode titled Bygones was way more interesting and could have been an appropriate ending for the show, but it was listed as the 64th episode only. Bygones was all about Baloo being the responsible and biased citizen of Cape Suzette, and of course a lot of sky adventures. Well, Baloo met the bygone hero of this town, Rick Sky, the leader of the Squadron of 7, who fought in the Great War, which ended 20 years ago. So after Rick's unprecedented return, everyone in the town got suspicious, but Baloo wanted to dig deeper to learn the truth. From the medals, records and logbooks, he became partly sure that it might be the real Rick Sky, but he started to believe in Rick after he investigated White Cliffs of Rover and found out that Rick wasn't really killed on the battlefield. Rather, he and his team members were actually suspended in time during a wartime mission and get back his sea duck. After that, with the help of a good old grenade, they also blasted the propellers of Iron Vulture, forcing Don Carnage to run for his life. Although the creators didn't even give any kind of hint of this show coming to an end after its next episode, this could have been a potential story where we could see some emotional closure of these characters, but nothing such happened in Bygones. The final episode, Flying Dupes. Now let's talk about the final episode of the series, Flying Dupes, and what actually happened in this particular episode to become so controversial. Well, Flying Dupes opens with the Thembrian official delivering a package that looks like a gift box, asking Baloo to transport it to the High Marshal of Thembria. This box actually contained a time bomb, created by the war-profiteering weapon manufacturers who wanted to incite a war between Thembria and Cape Suzette. Now Baloo unknowingly boards the plane to deliver the package, but the stubbornly arrogant Colonel Spigot, who was tasked with operating the plane, interrupts Baloo's assignment. He desperately wants to learn how to fly the plane, and Baloo patiently tolerates his tantrums. However, Spigot managed to grab the box and arrived at the High Marshal's bathroom to build an impression, but the final blast inevitably happened. Although no one was killed, and not even injured except for that one corrupted official who eventually had to endure the blast. High Marshal was happy, but the episode ended with him boarding a plane operated by a totally inexperienced Spigot. That mishandled plane perhaps lost its way to fall into a canyon. But the episode ended right there without any further explanation of what happened to them, and that's exactly how it didn't even show Baloo and his greatest companion Kit, as if they didn't even matter, and I think it was quite disrespectful that Baloo and Kit, despite being the protagonists, ended up feeling nothing more than side characters of the story. The controversial afterlife of the finale. So yeah, the way it ended was obviously raising questions at that time, and it's then talk today for the same concern. Why would a children's animated show end with a story that deals with a political bombing? Yes, that has been eating a lot of fans like us, because Flying Dupes was eventually banned by Disney after getting into so much controversy, but we gotta understand that it wasn't really a deliberate choice. Back then, it was a strict rule that a syndicated show like TaleSpin would run for only 65 episodes and not more than that. So instead of writing a better one to replace this questionable finale, they just kept it right there, and as a result, we got the most confusing ending of a kids' cartoon show in the history of animation. So the afterlife of this ending got some bizarre speculations online, because fans were usually not happy. Some people said that TaleSpin already had a pretty shadowy history. I mean, in many episodes, the writers often went beyond their childlike imaginations and tried to show a broader picture of world problems, sometimes hinting at political and technological paranoia. So it wasn't much of a surprise that an episode like Flying Dupes was listed in their schedule, but they still could have made it a better ending, at least to honour their fans and the characters they created. Behind the scenes, cast and creative team. I think now is the time I should talk about the real people behind the show, those who have voiced these characters for its long run, and the creative team, the brains behind the project. Ed Gilbert is the first name that comes to mind, because he's given Baloo that perfect, warm but edgy vibe that is still a big part of many of our childhoods. He has this sharp pilot instinct, but he's also a lazy bear, and Gilbert's voice made sure that we feel that contradiction in this character. Then we've got RJ Williams as Kit Cloudkicker, who is exactly the opposite of Gilbert's lazy charm. Kit sounds almost mischievous, like a precocious schoolboy, but he's extremely skilled and the warmest companion for Baloo. And then we got Sally Struthers giving a voice to the business brain, Rebecca Cunningham, while Jana Michaels voiced Molly as a cute little kid. As the supporting members, we got Pat Fraley voicing Wildcat, the legendary voice of Jim Cummings as Don Carnage, and Tony J as Shere Khan. Even though Baloo and Kit are the soul of the story, without Don Carnage's hilariously improved accent and Shere Khan's malevolent voice with such gravity, TaleSpin would have been nothing. Needless to say, Jim Magan and Mark Zasloff were behind the main creative vision, but apart from them, we got other amazing writers like Alan Burnett, Len Uli, and many more. Without these names, there wouldn't have been a total of 65 episodes with these bustling, fun-loving characters in a beautiful town of Cape Suzette, where nature and urban development coexist in a proper balance. What came next? Well, the show ended in the year 1991, and since then, it has become a pop culture phenomenon. VHS tapes kept it alive for many years until streaming platforms, YouTube, and simply short viral clips in internet now are bringing them back in the conversation again and again. But in 2017, when Disney was bringing callbacks to those late 80s and early 90s cartoons, they brought a reimagination of DuckTales, and in that episode, we got a grown-up version of Kit Cloudkicker, who is now running the business Hire for Hire, and reconnecting with his old friend Molly Cunningham. But for several reasons, this reimagined DuckTales was nowhere near the original one. Even real fans just hated it, calling it the worst Disney would come up with. Well, the reason was not just Cloud Kicker, but many other characters whose voices were changed. Also, an extreme level of meta jokes ruined the original mood that everyone expected from the show. Even Kit's character was pretty poorly handled. I mean, he used to be a skilled air surfer and almost a prodigious kid for aviation, so why did his adult version end up being a terrible pilot? However, there was a divisive opinion on that because I know many people who actually loved an older Kit Cloud Kicker as a nostalgic nod to the original TaleSpin, but I think Kit deserved a much better arc in the show. Well, that's it guys. Decades have passed, but TaleSpin remained iconic amongst the 90s kids who still revisit these characters once in a while. Surely it deserved a better ending or maybe a better reinterpretation, but instead, a lack of careful handling of an iconic story hurt some sentiments. I hope that if TaleSpin ever gets a renewal in the future, it understands its origin and tries to give the characters a proper closure. On that note, this video is over. If you've enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Also, don't forget to leave a comment below about your favourite moments from TaleSpin. Until then, goodbye and see you in the next one.